Rediscover your past by digitizing your family's memories with LEGACYBOX. Watch until the end of this video to find out more about preserving your legacy, and then visit LEGACYBOX.com/recollection. 1931 unfolded as one of the most difficult chapters of the Great Depression. Yet even against this bleak backdrop, there were moments of ingenuity, courage, and cultural growth, including landmark engineering feats to small sparks of entertainment that lifted the spirits of 124 million Americans that experienced 1931 firsthand. On January 6th, inventor Thomas Edison submitted his very last patent application, this time for an electroplating process for creating phonograph records. Valentine's Day brought moviegoers to the premiere of Dracula, released on February 14th, and it featured Bela Lugosi in the role that would define his career. On March 3rd, the Star-Spangled Banner was officially designated as the United States national anthem, cementing Francis Scott Key's 1814 lyrics as a permanent piece of the American identity. Nevada began a new era on March 17th, when the state fully legalized gambling, a decision that would reshape its economy and lead to the rise of modern Las Vegas. Just one day later, on March 18th, Schick introduced the first electric shavers to American consumers. They were priced at $25, and they sold about 3,000 units that first year. The sports world was stunned on March 31st, as news broke that legendary Notre Dame football coach Knute Rockne had died in a plane crash at the age of 43, ending a career defined by an astonishing winning record. April 2nd was the day that 17-year-old Jackie Mitchell famously struck out both Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig during an exhibition game in Chattanooga, Tennessee, delivering one of baseball's most unbelievable moments. On May 1st, a new world record was set as the Empire State Building officially opened in New York City and claimed the title of the tallest building on Earth. It was also built at a record speed, with construction lasting just 1 year and 45 days. June 23rd was the beginning of a round-the-globe flight undertaken by Wiley Post and Harold Gatty. The pair lifted off from Roosevelt Field in New York in hopes of circling the globe faster than anyone before them, and they did it in just 8 days. At the height of summer, specifically July 14th, the governor of South Dakota urgently pleaded for federal help as a massive grasshopper plague devastated farmlands in South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska. Bing Crosby's road to fame took a major step forward on September 2nd, the day he launched his solo radio show. 15 Minutes with Bing Crosby premiered on CBS Radio, and the show introduced Bing's crooner style to the masses. Comic strip readers saw a fresh face in the newspapers on October 4th, when Chester Gould introduced us to Dick Tracy, a detective whose sharp style and tougher attitude stood out instantly. On October 18th, inventor Thomas Edison, whose innovations shaped modern living, died in East Orange, New Jersey. Edison was 84 when he died, and there were over 1,000 patents in his name. Also on October 18th, Al Capone was convicted on 5 counts of tax evasion. He was sentenced a week later to 11 years in prison and sent off to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. On November 3rd, Americans were introduced to Alka-Seltzer. The effervescent remedy hit store shelves and quickly became a household favorite. Movie theaters were packed on November 21st for the debut of Frankenstein. The classic showcased Boris Karloff as the monster in one of the most enduring monster roles ever created. Finally, on December 10th, Jane Addams made history as the first American woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Addams was an activist and social worker from Chicago who spent most of her life advocating for world peace. The year 1932 unfolded as one of the lowest points of the Great Depression. For 124 million Americans, life felt uncertain, and they were just hoping for any signs of a recovery. Despite this, moments of courage, innovation, and cultural change still pushed the country forward, making 1932 a year filled with important events and new milestones. Starting the year off on January 12th, a political milestone occurred as Hattie Caraway of Arkansas became the first woman ever elected to the United States Senate, setting a precedent that would encourage future generations. On February 4th, the nation turned its attention to winter sports as the 1932 Winter Olympics opened in Lake Placid, New York. Athletes from all over the world descended upon upstate New York's snowy landscape, which drew 100,000 spectators over the course of the games. February 15th was an important date in radio history when Clara, Lou, and Em considered the very first daytime network soap opera aired in the morning on NBC Radio, after it began as an evening program in 1931. On February 22nd, the U.S. War Department revived the Purple Heart, restoring the decoration as an honor awarded in the President's name to service members wounded or killed in action. Retroactive awards would soon follow. March 1st is remembered for one of the most heartbreaking crimes in American history, the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh Jr. from the family's New Jersey home. Aviator Charles Lindbergh paid a $70,000 ransom, but 10 weeks later, the child's body was discovered a few miles away, shocking the nation. Tensions boiled over on March 7th, when unemployed auto workers in Dearborn, Michigan marched outside Ford's River Rouge plant. Police opened fire on protesters, leaving 4 people dead in what became known as the Ford Hunger March. April 2nd saw the release of Tarzan the Ape Man, starring Olympic swimmer Johnny Weissmuller. Weissmuller would go on to star in a total of 12 iconic Tarzan films. On May 2nd, Americans were introduced to a new voice on the airwaves, as comedian Jack Benny's radio show broadcast for the very first time, launching a career that would span decades. On May 21st, exactly 5 years after Charles Lindbergh's historic solo flight across the Atlantic, Amelia Earhart matched his achievement, this time as the first woman to complete the solo nonstop crossing, landing in Ireland after nearly 15 hours in the air. The Revenue Act of 1932 went into effect on June 6th, implementing the very first U.S. federal gas tax, 1 cent for every gallon of gasoline sold. July 1st was when New York Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt secured the Democratic nomination for president at the party's convention in Chicago. On July 8th, the economic crisis reached a painful milestone when the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit its lowest point of the Great Depression, bottoming out at 41.22. On July 28th, President Herbert Hoover ordered federal troops to evict the Bonus Army, World War I veterans and their families, demanding early payment of promised bonuses. They had built encampments in Washington, D.C. in protest, and their eviction resulted in 4 deaths, which deepened public anger. Los Angeles welcomed athletes from around the globe on July 30th, as the 1932 Summer Olympics officially kicked off. 37 countries sent athletes to the Games, which was down from 46 4 years earlier, due to the Great Depression that continued to be a worldwide event. August 1st introduced us to a coin that would become a household staple. The George Washington quarter was released into circulation for the first time. On October 1st, baseball fans couldn't stop talking about Babe Ruth's legendary called shot. It occurred in the 5th inning of Game 3 of the 1932 World Series, a moment that would be forever woven into sports folklore. On October 15th, the University of Michigan Marching Band, then known as the Varsity Band, unveiled the Script Ohio formation during the Michigan-Ohio State football game. This was long before Ohio State adopted the tradition. November 7th brought another broadcasting first, when the radio program Buck Rogers in the 25th Century first began airing. The science fiction program sparked imaginations across the country and distracted families from the ongoing financial stress of the times. On November 8th, Americans went to the polls and delivered a resounding landslide victory to Franklin D. Roosevelt over incumbent Herbert Hoover. The country embraced FDR's promise of a New Deal, along with the promise to repeal Prohibition. And finally, on December 27th, tens of thousands flocked to New York City for the grand opening of Radio City Music Hall, a glittering Art Deco theater that would soon become home to the world-famous Rockettes. By 1933, American unemployment was soaring, and the nation's population stood at roughly 125 million people. They were looking for reassurance and had just given FDR the opportunity to turn things around. The year 1933 was full of consequential events that would reverberate for years to come. On January 5th, construction began on the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Workers began excavating 3.25 million cubic feet of dirt for the structure's huge anchorages. January 5th was also the day that Calvin Coolidge, the 30th President of the United States, died of coronary thrombosis in Northampton, Massachusetts. On February 8th, Boeing accomplished a major feat with its Boeing 247. This was the first all-metal commercial aircraft to complete a flight, ushering in a new generation of faster and safer air travel. February 15th saw President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt survive an assassination attempt in Miami, Florida. An Italian immigrant fired at FDR, but instead hit and mortally wounded Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak. On February 17th, the very first issue of the news magazine Newsweek was published, adding a new voice to the American news media. A new land speed record was set on February 22nd, when British racer Malcolm Campbell drove his famous Bluebird car 272.46 miles per hour in Daytona Beach, Florida. On March 2nd, King Kong, a film starring Fay Wray, premiered at Radio City Music Hall in New York. It redefined the movie spectacle and amazed theatergoers with its special effects. Franklin D. Roosevelt was inaugurated on March 4th. He became the 32nd president, pledging to pull the U.S. out of the Depression, stating in his inaugural address that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The very next day, on March 5th, FDR ordered a 10-day nationwide bank holiday in an attempt to stem bank failures and restore confidence. Meanwhile, on March 6th, Eleanor Roosevelt became the First Lady to hold an official press conference at the White House. This was the first in a series of all-female press conferences that Roosevelt held to shape public opinion on her husband's New Deal issues. On March 7th, the real estate board game Monopoly was developed by Charles Darrow, an unemployed salesman. The finalized version evolved from an earlier game created by Lizzie McGee, called The Landlord's Game, from 1904. On March 12th, FDR conducted his first fireside chat via the radio, speaking directly to 60 million listening Americans, just 8 days after his inauguration. Automobile company Studebaker filed for bankruptcy on March 18th. The company's president, Albert Erskine, resigned, and later that year he took his own life, but Studebaker would eventually rebound from its financial troubles. On April 19th, FDR officially took the United States off the gold standard, a major shift in economic policy. This prohibited gold exports and required citizens to exchange gold for paper money. May 27th brought a bit of optimism when the World's Fair opened in Chicago. The Century of Progress exposition highlighted technological innovation that inspired nearly 50 million visitors over the next year. On June 6th, Richard Hollingshead opened the world's first drive-in movie theater, called the Park-In Theater. This new form of entertainment opened in Pennsauken, New Jersey, and the first feature film shown was Wife, Beware. John Dillinger robbed his first bank on June 10th, taking $10,600 from the National Bank in New Carlisle, Ohio, and it would be months before he was captured. On July 6th, the short film Nursery Rhymes premiered, starring Ted Healy and his Stooges. This was the first film appearance of the comedy trio The Three Stooges. July 12th was the date that the United States Congress passed the first federal minimum wage, set at just 33 cents per hour. On July 22nd, aviator Wiley Post completed the very first solo flight around the world. He landed his plane back at Floyd Bennett Field in New York after 7 days, 18 hours, and 49 minutes. On October 10th, United Airlines Flight 23 was destroyed by a mid-air explosion over Chesterton, Indiana. This was the first proven case of sabotage in civil aviation, and it killed all 7 on board. No suspect was ever identified. The 20th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution went into effect on October 15th. This amendment changed the start of a presidential term to January 20th and the start of Congress's term to January 3rd, shortening the lame duck period between elections. 2 days later, on October 17th, Albert Einstein arrived in the United States as a refugee, having fled persecution in Nazi Germany. The scientist settled in Princeton, New Jersey, and began work at the Institute for Advanced Study. Prohibition was officially repealed on December 5th with the 21st Amendment to the Constitution. Prohibition had been the law of the land since 1920. Finally, on December 21st, a 5-year-old Shirley Temple signed a studio contract with Fox Films. The move launched her career, making her a child star, and it also helped save the financially struggling studio from bankruptcy. By 1934, the United States was faced with economic hardship from the Great Depression, but then the Dust Bowl began to devastate the plains of Middle America. The nation's population hovered around 126 million, and Americans were watching closely as economic reform, pop culture, and world events shaped the year 1934. The Gold Reserve Act went into effect on January 30th, forcing all gold held by the Federal Reserve to be surrendered to the U.S. Treasury. Shortly afterward, President Roosevelt raised the official gold price from $20.67 to $35 an ounce, dramatically reshaping monetary policy. Released on February 22nd, Frank Capra's It Happened One Night premiered, starring Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. The film became a sensation and later made Academy Awards history by winning all 5 major Oscars. On March 22nd, the first Masters tournament teed off in Augusta, Georgia. Golfers struggled with the challenging course, but Horton Smith was the first winner, finishing 4 under par. Beginning May 11th, a massive 2-day Dust Bowl storm stripped away millions of tons of topsoil across the Great Plains, worsening already dire farming conditions. On May 23rd, lawmen, led by Texas Ranger Frank Hamer, ambushed and killed Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow in Louisiana, bringing a violent 2-year crime spree to an end. June 9th introduced a new cartoon star, as Donald Duck made his first appearance in the Walt Disney animated short The Wise Little Hen. Just days later, on June 12th, the Black McKellar Bill forced the breakup of William Boeing's aviation empire, separating aircraft manufacturing from airline operations, spinning off separate companies in the Boeing Airplane Company and United Airlines. On June 22nd, John Dillinger was officially labeled America's first public enemy #1, symbolizing the federal government's war on high-profile criminals. On June 30th, the NFL's Portsmouth Spartans were sold and relocated to Detroit, where they were rebranded as the Detroit Lions. July 1st marked a turning point in Hollywood, as the Hays Code went into full enforcement, strictly regulating movies for decades to come. It restricted moral content, banned profanity, nudity, explicit sexuality, and sympathetic portrayals of crime. A presidential first occurred on July 11th, when Franklin D. Roosevelt became the first U.S. president to pass through the Panama Canal. Outside Chicago's Biograph Theater on July 22nd, federal agents shot and killed John Dillinger, ending the short but infamous career of America's most wanted criminal. On August 2nd, the death of German President Paul von Hindenburg allowed Adolf Hitler to consolidate absolute power, becoming Führer of Nazi Germany. August 6th saw a shift in U.S. foreign policy as American troops finally withdrew from Haiti, ending a military occupation that had lasted since 1915. Arriving on August 11th, the first group of civilian inmates, classified as most dangerous, were transferred to Alcatraz, beginning its legacy as America's toughest prison. On September 24th, Babe Ruth made his final appearance at Yankee Stadium, watched by thousands of fans who knew an era was ending. October 22nd brought another violent conclusion when FBI agents killed Charles Pretty Boy Floyd in an Ohio cornfield after years on the run. Taking the stage on November 21st, a teenage Ella Fitzgerald sang at Harlem's Apollo Theater on amateur night, unknowingly launching her legendary career. The following evening, on November 22nd, Santa Claus is Coming to Town was heard for the first time on Eddie Cantor's radio show. On November 29th, the Chicago Bears defeated the Detroit Lions in the first NFL game broadcast nationwide, and it was also the league's first Thanksgiving Day game. Closing out the year on December 28th, Bright Eyes premiered starring Shirley Temple, and it featured the unforgettable song on the good ship Lollipop. In 1935, the United States had grown to a nation of 127 million, and daily life was still being shaped by the Great Depression. Yet even in hard times, the year was full of important firsts, including a sweeping government program designed to put Americans back to work. This is the year 1935. Beginning on January 4th, radio audiences heard a young Bob Hope on a national network for the first time when he appeared on the Intimate Review, beginning his rise as one of America's most enduring entertainers. On January 19th, Chicago-based Cooper's Inc. introduced the world's first men's briefs, branded The Jockey, forever changing men's underwear and fashion. January 24th marked when Kruger's Cream Ale became the first canned beer sold in the United States, helping launch a new era in beverage packaging. February 2nd brought a new crime-fighting tool when Leonard Keeler first used his polygraph machine on criminal suspects in Wisconsin, whose later convictions gave the lie detector test national attention. Just 2 weeks later, on February 22nd, airplanes were officially banned from flying over the White House, reflecting growing concerns about securing the president at all times. April 14th became known as Black Sunday, when one of the worst dust storms in history turned daylight into darkness across the Midwest. It was this day that the nickname Dust Bowl was first used. Bride of Frankenstein hit theaters on April 19th, with Boris Karloff and Elsa Lanchester starring in the sequel to the 1931 horror classic. On May 6th, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 7034, creating the Works Progress Administration, which would employ millions of Americans on public projects. The evening of May 24th made sports history, as the first Major League night baseball game was played in Cincinnati, where the Reds defeated Philadelphia 2-1 under newly installed lights. One day later, on May 25th, Ohio State sophomore Jesse Owens delivered what many called the greatest 45 minutes in sports history, equaling or breaking 4 track world records at a Big Ten meet in Ann Arbor. June 10th marked the beginning of a movement when Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in Akron, Ohio by Bill W. and Dr. Bob Smith, 2 hopeless alcoholics. Within a few years, groups popped up in new places, offering a new path to recovery. On June 28th, President Roosevelt ordered construction of a massive federal gold vault at Fort Knox, Kentucky, destined to become one of the most famous secure facilities in the world. City life started to change on July 16th, as the world's first parking meters were installed in Oklahoma City, introducing a new way to manage congestion on crowded streets. July 30th ushered in a change in book publishing, when Penguin Books released its first set of paperbacks, making affordable books widely available to the public. On August 14th, the Social Security Act became law, creating a federal safety net for the elderly, unemployed, and disabled. There was an air tragedy on August 15th, when humorist Will Rogers and aviator Wiley Post were killed in a plane crash near Barrow, Alaska. Their unexpected deaths shocked the nation. September 2nd brought devastation to South Florida as the Labor Day hurricane roared ashore in the Upper Keys, killing more than 400 people in what remains the most intense U.S. landfall on record. On September 30th, President Roosevelt formally dedicated Hoover Dam, celebrating one of the largest and most ambitious engineering projects in American history. There was a new Broadway show that premiered on October 10th. That's when Porgy and Bess began its run, often hailed as the first great American opera. The year closed with a sports first on December 9th, as the first Heisman Trophy was awarded to halfback Jay Berwanger of the University of Chicago, who rushed for 577 yards, passed for 405, returned kickoffs, scored 6 touchdowns, and added 5 extra points. In 1936, the United States was still trying to overcome the economic crisis caused by the Great Depression. There were also plenty of events that captured the public's attention, and major political decisions that shaped the future at home and abroad. For 128 million Americans, there was both hardship and progress. These are the moments that shaped the year 1936. Beginning on January 4th, Billboard magazine published its first ever music hit parade, a precursor to the modern Hot 100, with jazz violinist Joe Venuti and his orchestra's Stop, Look and Listen taking the first #1 spot. On January 29th, the very first players were elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. The inaugural class included Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Honus Wagner, Christy Mathewson, and Walter Johnson. February 8th was the first time the NFL Draft was ever held. Jay Berwanger of the University of Chicago became the league's first draft pick, selected by the Philadelphia Eagles, although he never played in the NFL due to a salary dispute. On February 17th, comic readers were introduced to The Phantom, widely regarded as the first costumed superhero, whose skin-tight suit and mask helped define the modern comic book hero. 1936 was a leap year, and on February 29th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Second Neutrality Act, attempting to keep the United States out of growing international conflicts in Europe. March 25th created a spectacle when a massive 200-inch mirror created by Corning in New York was loaded onto a train for a cross-country trip bound for California to be used in the Hale telescope. It was the largest telescope mirror ever made at the time, and people lined up on the roads to see the mirror pass. On April 3rd, Bruno Richard Hauptmann, convicted of kidnapping and murdering Charles Lindbergh's infant son, was executed by electrocution at New Jersey State Prison. A small invention with everyday impact appeared on May 5th, when Edward Ravenscroft patented the screw-on bottle cap with a pour lid, a design that is still widely used today. On June 11th, a new religious institution was established with the founding of the Presbyterian Church of America in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, now called the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. American life was reshaped on June 30th. That's when Congress approved a 40-hour work week for federal employees, reinforcing modern labor standards and setting a standard for new labor laws in the coming years. On that same day, June 30th, Margaret Mitchell's novel, Gone with the Wind, was published, quickly becoming one of the best-selling and most influential books of the century. On July 7th, American inventor Henry Phillips received patents for the cross-recessed screw and screwdriver. The design would become known worldwide as the Phillips head, and it would become the dominant screw on assembly lines because of its self-centering, non-slip features. August 1st was the opening of the Summer Olympic Games in Berlin, Germany. The Games were opened by Adolf Hitler amid intense international attention, and Nazi Germany used it as a massive propaganda tool, projecting power, unity, and peace. Just 2 days later, on August 3rd, Jesse Owens stunned the world by winning the 100-meter dash in front of Hitler, the first of 4 gold medals he would capture at the Games. On August 14th, Rainey Bethia was hanged in Owensboro, Kentucky, marking the very last public execution in the United States. On August 24th, President Roosevelt authorized the FBI to gather intelligence on fascist and communist groups, broadening the Bureau's role in national security and expanding federal power. By September 29th, radio entered politics in a new way, being used for the first time in a presidential campaign. This type of political advertising transformed how candidates reached voters. President Roosevelt rededicated the Statue of Liberty on October 28th. This was a celebration of the 50th anniversary of the French gift, which has come to symbolize immigration, freedom, and national identity. On November 3rd, FDR won re-election in a landslide victory, defeating Alf Landon in one of the most one-sided electoral victories in U.S. history. Later that month, on November 23rd, Life magazine debuted as a weekly photojournalism publication, soon becoming one of the most influential magazines in the world. The year closed with a royal shock on December 10th. That's when King Edward VIII abdicated the British throne, giving up the crown to marry an American divorcee, Wallis Simpson, which caused quite the constitutional crisis in England. America in 1937 had grown to nearly 129 million people. As the country was climbing out of the Great Depression, the year would be marked by tragedy, labor unrest, and a growing international tension that would remind people that the future was far from certain. This is 1937. On January 19th, aviation history was made when Howard Hughes flew from Los Angeles to New York in just 7 hours, 28 minutes, and 25 seconds, setting a stunning new transcontinental air record. Also on January 19th, 22-year-old Charlie Johns wed his 9-year-old neighbor, Eunice Winstead, in Tennessee. This sparked outrage that pushed several states to establish or strengthen minimum marriage age laws. January 20th marked a constitutional first as Franklin D. Roosevelt was sworn in for his second term, becoming the first president inaugurated on January 20th instead of March 4th. After weeks of frustration, February 11th brought resolution when the 44-day sit-down strike at General Motors in Flint, Michigan ended, a major victory for organized labor. On February 16th, the future of modern materials shifted when DuPont patented nylon, a synthetic fiber developed by chemist Wallace Carothers. On March 10th, Benny Goodman was officially hailed as the King of Swing after a wildly popular performance at New York City's Paramount Theater. March 15th quietly changed medicine with the opening of the first American hospital blood bank at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. Disaster struck on March 18th when a natural gas explosion destroyed the New London School in East Texas, killing more than 295 students and teachers in the deadliest school tragedy in U.S. history. On May 3rd, American author Margaret Mitchell won the Pulitzer Prize for her 1936 novel Gone with the Wind. On the evening of May 6th, the German airship Hindenburg burst into flames while docking in Lakehurst, New Jersey, killing 36 people. The fire was fueled by the ship's hydrogen-filled structure, bringing the passenger airship era to an abrupt end. Later that month, on May 23rd, industrial titan and one of the richest men in the world, John D. Rockefeller, died at the age of 97 from a heart attack, following years of declining health. San Francisco celebrated on May 28th, as the Golden Gate Bridge officially opened to vehicular traffic, instantly becoming an American icon. May 30th turned tragic when Chicago police shot and killed 10 unarmed demonstrators during a labor protest. This day is remembered as the Memorial Day Massacre. An extremely rare glimpse occurred on June 7th. That's when Time magazine published only the second known photograph of the U.S. Supreme Court in session. The photo was taken illegally, and cameras are permanently banned. That same day, June 7th, Hollywood mourned the death of actress Jean Harlow at just 26 years old. She died from kidney failure, likely linked to undiagnosed kidney disease caused by scarlet fever she had when she was a child. Sports history was made on June 22nd, when boxer Joe Louis knocked out heavyweight champion James Braddock in the 8th round at Comiskey Park in Chicago, winning the World Heavyweight Championship and beginning the longest run as the reigning heavyweight champion. Beginning July 2nd, a new tradition was established when, for the first time, a 24-hour honor guard was first posted at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington National Cemetery. Also on July 2nd, aviation's greatest mystery began as Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan disappeared over the Pacific Ocean during a round-the-world flight attempt. July 5th was the day that Hormel first released Spam, a canned meat product that would become a wartime staple and cultural icon. With the passage of the Marijuana Tax Act on August 2nd, the federal government effectively outlawed marijuana and its byproducts, completely reshaping American drug policy. On August 14th, the Appalachian Trail was officially completed, stretching more than 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine. September 14th reflected growing global unease as President Roosevelt banned U.S. ships from carrying any arms to China or Japan, as the two countries were at war with each other. A modern literary fantasy began on September 21st. That's when J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit was first published, introducing readers to the world of Middle-earth. International tensions flared on December 12th, when a Japanese aircraft attacked and sank the U.S. gunboat Panay on China's Yangtze River, killing several crew members. Japan later issued an apology and paid reparations to the United States. Just days before Christmas, on December 21st, film history was made when Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered in Los Angeles, becoming the world's first full-length animated feature film. In 1938, aggressive moves by Nazi Germany were capturing the world's attention. Yet life still went on in the United States as the population was closing in on 130 million people. Radio and movies offered an escape from the perils of the Depression, while the events and global tension of 1938 drifted us closer to a world war. The year began on January 3rd, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt helped launch the March of Dimes to fight polio, a disease that terrified families across America. Roosevelt himself had been paralyzed by polio in 1921, and the foundation encouraged ordinary citizens to mail dimes to the White House to support research and treatment. The campaign transformed public fundraising and eventually helped finance the work that led to the polio vaccine in the 1950s. Europe was on edge on March 12th when Nazi Germany invaded Austria. German troops were met by cheering crowds, and Austria was quickly absorbed into Hitler's expanding Third Reich. The invasion violated international agreements, but Britain and France took no military action, reinforcing Hitler's belief that he could continue expanding without serious resistance. On April 6th, a chemist at DuPont named Roy Plunkett made an accidental discovery while working with refrigerant gases. One of his canisters appeared empty, but inside was a strange white powder. That substance would be branded as Teflon. Its extreme slipperiness and resistance to heat would eventually revolutionize cookware, industry, and even space travel. A brand new kind of hero arrived on April 18th. Superman debuted in Action Comics #1, cover dated June but released in April. Created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, Superman introduced the world to the modern superhero, a costumed champion with superhuman powers, fighting for truth and justice. His immediate popularity launched the entire superhero genre. On May 14th, moviegoers were treated to one of Hollywood's most enduring stories when The Adventures of Robin Hood premiered. Starring Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland, the film dazzled audiences with sword fights, lush Technicolor scenery, and a sweeping musical score. It became one of the defining adventure films of the era and cemented Flynn's image as a swashbuckling star. A new tourist attraction opened on June 23rd in St. Augustine, Florida. Marineland was the world's first major oceanarium, and visitors could view dolphins, fish, and other marine life up close in a way never before possible. It reflected a growing public fascination with science, nature, and family-friendly roadside attractions during the automobile age. Just one day later, on June 24th, residents near Pittsburgh were stunned when a 500-ton meteorite reportedly landed in the region. While details were debated, newspapers seized on the story, feeding public fascination with outer space and cosmic events at a time when astronomy and science fiction were both capturing imaginations. On July 3rd, President Roosevelt traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate the Eternal Light Peace Memorial, lighting a permanent flame to honor Civil War veterans. The monument symbolized unity and reconciliation between North and South, and its message of peace carried special weight as the world edged closer to another global conflict. As summer ended, a devastating storm struck on September 21st. The Great New England Hurricane roared ashore with little warning. Making landfall on Long Island before tearing through New England, the storm killed an estimated 500 to 700 people and caused massive flooding and destruction. Entire coastal towns were devastated, and it remains one of the deadliest natural disasters in U.S. history. On September 30th, European leaders met in Germany and signed the Munich Agreement, allowing Hitler to annex parts of Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned home declaring peace. Many hoped war had been avoided, but within a year, those hopes would be shattered. The Fair Labor Standards Act went into effect on October 24th. The law restricted child labor, established a federal minimum wage, and set limits on working hours. The legislation marked a major expansion of worker protections and reshaped American labor standards for generations. On October 30th, millions tuned in to hear what sounded like a breaking news report: Martians invading New Jersey. Orson Welles' radio adaptation of The War of the Worlds was so realistic that many listeners believed it was real, causing confusion and panic in some communities. The broadcast became legendary and demonstrated the immense power of radio. On November 1st, at Pimlico Racecourse, the underdog racehorse Seabiscuit faced off against Triple Crown winner War Admiral, with jockey George Wolfe aboard. Seabiscuit won decisively, setting a track record. The race became one of the most famous in history, symbolizing hope and perseverance during hard times. November 9th was the day that cartoonist Al Capp introduced Sadie Hawkins Day in his popular Little Abner comic strip. The fictional holiday, when women asked men out, became a real cultural phenomenon. Schools and communities across America soon held Sadie Hawkins dances, and the tradition endured for decades. On November 27th, a little-known 23-year-old singer named Frank Sinatra was arrested in New Jersey on a morality charge that was quickly downgraded and dismissed. Though minor at the time, the incident later became a footnote in the early life of a man who would soon become one of the biggest stars in American music. Just before Christmas, on December 23rd, tragedy nearly struck Hollywood when Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch, was badly burned after her costume caught fire during filming of The Wizard of Oz. She suffered serious injuries and was hospitalized for weeks. The accident highlighted the real dangers behind Hollywood's golden age magic. As 1939 began, the Great Depression was beginning to ease. Technology was accelerating, and pop culture was booming, but the sense of optimism among 131 million Americans was very fragile. As new companies formed in garages, superheroes leapt off comic pages, and Hollywood was cranking out timeless classics, Europe was falling into catastrophe. And by the end of 1939, the world would be in chaos. January 1st opened in a Palo Alto, California garage, where engineers Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard founded Hewlett-Packard. With just a few $100s and later a rented workspace, the company would become a cornerstone of modern technology and the symbolic birthplace of Silicon Valley. On January 12th, publisher Martin Goodman launched Timely Comics in New York City. The company would eventually be renamed Marvel Comics, laying the groundwork for a universe of characters that would dominate popular culture. January 25th marked a scientific breakthrough when researchers at Columbia University successfully conducted the first nuclear fission experiment in the United States. Scientists, including Enrico Fermi, demonstrated that splitting a uranium atom released enormous energy, knowledge that would soon reshape global warfare. By March 7th, American newsstands welcomed the debut of Glamour magazine, aimed at working women rather than social elites. The publication reflected shifting attitudes toward women, fashion, and independence at the close of the Depression era. March 15th shattered hopes of peace when Nazi Germany invaded and occupied Czechoslovakia. The move exposed the failure of the Munich Agreement and made clear that Adolf Hitler's territorial ambitions would not be restrained by diplomacy. On March 27th, college basketball history was made when the University of Oregon defeated Ohio State to win the very first NCAA men's basketball championship. What began as a modest tournament would later evolve into the nationwide annual phenomenon known as March Madness. March 30th introduced a new, darker kind of hero, as Batman debuted in Detective Comics number 27. Unlike other superheroes of the time, Batman relied on intellect, grit, and gadgets. and he quickly became one of the most popular characters in American storytelling. April 9th brought a powerful stand against discrimination when Marian Anderson performed at the Lincoln Memorial before 75,000 people. Barred from Constitution Hall because of her race, her performance became a defining civil rights moment, prompting First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt to resign from the Daughters of the American Revolution. On April 14th, author John Steinbeck published The Grapes of Wrath. Chronicling Dust Bowl migrants and economic hardship, the novel captured the human toll of the Great Depression and quickly became one of the most influential American books ever written. April 30th saw a first in presidential history when Franklin D. Roosevelt appeared on television at the opening of the New York World's Fair. Though television ownership was rare, the moment signaled a new era in political communication. June 7th marked a historic diplomatic visit as King George VI and Queen Elizabeth arrived in the United States, becoming the first reigning British monarchs to do so. The visit was intended to strengthen ties as Europe edged closer to war. On June 21st, the New York Yankees announced Lou Gehrig's retirement after doctors diagnosed him with ALS. His farewell speech weeks later, declaring himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth, became one of the most emotional moments in sports history. August 2nd carried an ominous warning when Albert Einstein signed a letter urging President Roosevelt to consider atomic research. The letter ultimately led to the creation of the Manhattan Project, forever altering the course of science and warfare. August 15th brought the Hollywood premiere of The Wizard of Oz. Though modestly received at first, the film's Technicolor visuals, music, and timeless themes later made it one of the most beloved films of all time. September 1st marked the outbreak of World War II, when Germany invaded Poland using blitzkrieg tactics. The invasion stunned the world and ignited the deadliest conflict in human history. Just 2 days later, on September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany, soon joined by other nations. Europe was now fully at war. September 5th found the United States standing apart as President Roosevelt formally declared American neutrality in the war. Though committed to peace, the nation would soon find neutrality difficult to maintain. On September 14th, aviation history advanced when Igor Sikorsky's VS-300 helicopter completed its first tethered flight. The brief lift proved that controlled vertical flight was possible, paving the way for modern helicopters. November 4th offered a glimpse of automotive luxury when Packard unveiled the first air-conditioned car at a Chicago exhibition. Though rare and expensive, it hinted at comfort becoming standard in future automobiles. November 15th saw a symbolic moment in Washington, D.C., as President Roosevelt laid the cornerstone for the Jefferson Memorial, honoring one of the nation's founding fathers. On November 16th, Al Capone was released from Alcatraz. His health badly deteriorated from neurosyphilis. Once America's most feared gangster, he returned to private life largely forgotten. December 15th brought an epic story to life with the Atlanta premiere of Gone with the Wind. The film went on to win Best Picture, and still remains the highest-grossing movie of all time once adjusted for inflation. Christmas Day, December 25th, introduced a holiday legend when Montgomery Ward unveiled Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. What began as a promotional coloring book created by copywriter Robert May quickly became an enduring symbol of the Christmas season. By 1940, the United States was a nation in transition, caught between the hardships of the 1930s and the growing pull of a world at war. The U.S. Census of 1940 showed the population had climbed to 132 million, and while most Americans were still focused on making ends meet, the headlines were becoming impossible to ignore. This is the year 1940. January 19th opened the year with sharp satire when the Three Stooges released You Nazi Spy, the first Hollywood film to openly mock Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. The short boldly included a disclaimer joking that any resemblance to real people was a miracle. On February 10th, animation history was made as Tom and Jerry debuted in Puss Gets the Boot. What began as a one-off MGM cartoon quickly launched one of the most enduring rivalries in cartoon history. February 23rd found folk singer Woody Guthrie at work on a song that would outlive him. Writing This Land Is Your Land, Guthrie created an anthem rooted in unity and fairness, one that later became one of the most recognizable American folk songs ever written. February 29th marked a breakthrough night at the Academy Awards, when Gone with the Wind dominated the ceremony. Most historic was Hattie McDaniel's Best Supporting Actress win, making her the very first African American to receive an Oscar, a milestone achieved amid segregation and controversy. April 7th brought recognition to Booker T. Washington, as he became the first African American featured on a U.S. postage stamp. The honor acknowledged his role as an educator and leader during the late 1800s and early 1900s. On April 23rd, tragedy struck in Natchez, Mississippi, when a fire tore through the Rhythm nightclub, killing 209 people. Locked exits and overcrowding made it one of the deadliest nightclub fires in American history, prompting renewed attention to building safety codes. On May 10th, British leadership changed when Winston Churchill replaced Neville Chamberlain as Prime Minister. Taking office as Nazi forces advanced across Europe, Churchill's resolve would soon define Britain's wartime spirit. May 15th quietly launched a future giant when the first McDonald's restaurant opened in San Bernardino, California. Initially a simple drive-in, it laid the foundation for what would become the world's most recognizable fast food brand. Addressing Congress on May 16th, President Franklin Roosevelt requested nearly $900 million to dramatically expand aircraft production. The move signaled America's rapid shift toward military readiness, even before formally entering the war. June 5th showcased industrial innovation as Goodyear unveiled a synthetic rubber tire in Akron, Ohio. With natural rubber supplies threatened by war, the development proved crucial for both civilian and military transportation. In South Dakota on June 16th, the first Sturgis motorcycle rally began. Originally a small race event, it would grow into one of the largest motorcycle gatherings in the world. On June 22nd, the very first Dairy Queen opened in Joliet, Illinois, introducing the world to soft-serve ice cream and becoming an American tradition for generations of families. June 24th turned attention to Philadelphia, as the Republican National Convention nominated Wendell Willkie for president, an unexpected choice who positioned himself as an internationalist during uncertain times. July 15th followed with a historic decision when Democrats nominated Franklin D. Roosevelt for an unprecedented third term. The move broke long-standing tradition and underscored fears that wartime leadership continuity was essential. July 27th delivered another animated milestone when Bugs Bunny officially debuted in A Wild Hare. With his relaxed confidence and catchphrase delivery, Bugs quickly became Warner Brothers' signature cartoon star. September 2nd marked a major milestone agreement as the U.S. announced the Destroyers for Bases deal with Great Britain. America transferred 50 naval destroyers in exchange for long-term leases on British bases, strengthening Atlantic defenses without formally entering the war. On September 14th, Congress passed the first peacetime military draft in U.S. history. The Selective Training and Service Act required men to register for possible service, signaling how close the nation stood to global conflict. November 5th made political history when FDR defeated Wendell Willkie, becoming the only U.S. president elected to a third term. The decision reflected voters' desire for stability as war raged overseas. Just 2 days later, on November 7th, engineering met disaster when the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapsed in high winds. Nicknamed Galloping Gertie, the bridge's dramatic failure killed a dog trapped in a car and became a defining lesson in structural engineering. December 21st closed the year on a sad literary note with the death of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who suffered a heart attack at age 44. He left behind an unfinished manuscript called The Last Tycoon, ending the life of one of America's most influential writers. Recollection Road and LEGACYBOX both believe it's important to preserve the past. If you're like me, there's a box of your family's treasured home movies and photos tucked away somewhere, and LEGACYBOX can help you preserve them digitally. The process is a simple and safe solution for converting your home movies and photos to thumb drive or to the cloud. Just send in your LEGACYBOX filled with old VHS and camcorder tapes, film reels, and pictures, and get back digital copies that can be easily enjoyed, shared, and kept organized. It's that easy. LEGACYBOX is trusted by over 1 million people, and it's all done right here in the USA. Get started preserving your past today. Go to LEGACYBOX.com/recollection to get an incredible 55% off. Buy today to take advantage of this exclusive offer and send in your memories when you're ready. Go to LEGACYBOX.com/recollection to save 55% while supplies last. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and make sure to check the description of this video for links to pick up a t-shirt. Also, don't forget to visit our friends at Horn and Hardart to save 10% on your next order. Visit hornandhardart.com/recollection. Thank you to our loyal Patreon supporters listed here. Visit patreon.com/recollectionroad to join the club.